Today I'm going to be telling you guys all about how I went to the Canadian Grand Prix for less than $200 US. It was an amazing experience and I can't wait to go to another Grand Prix. Today I'm going to be sharing how exactly I attended the race so cheaply and how you can attend your home race on a budget. To start out, I'm going to walk you through the cost of everything. So my ticket was $130 including fees. I bought it resale, and then I paid $18.75 for parking, and it was about $10 round trip to take the metro, and I paid $60 for this hat, which doesn't really count. My dad and I bought our tickets very last minute. It was about, I think, 15 hours before the race. We were definitely being very spontaneous by buying our tickets that soon before the race. We weren't even completely sure if we were going to be going. So I'd been monitoring ticket prices for over a month and they had been pretty steady, so I wasn't too worried about waiting until the last minute. I just wanted to make sure they weren't gonna dive at the last minute. So we bought resale Sunday only tickets. It was 15 or 16 hours before the race. Actually getting to the race, we left at 8 a.m. for about a 3.5 hour drive. We definitely should have left earlier, but I'm going to be going through some things that I would do differently next time at the end of the video, so I will dive into that a little more later. After the drive, we parked across the river from Montreal and took the metro to the circuit. So if you're unfamiliar with the Canadian Grand Prix, the circuit, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name, I don't speak French, but it's in the middle of the river. It's on an island and it's kind of hard to get to. Basically the only way to get there is you can drive from Montreal, but there's no parking available, so you can be dropped off there, but it's really tough. Or you can take the metro, so that's what we ended up doing. Using the metro was very easy from that side of the circuit, but I'd imagine it was pretty insane based on the crowds that we saw coming off of the Montreal trains. So I would be mindful of that if you're planning on going to the Canadian Grand Prix specifically, because coming from Montreal is a lot harder than from the side that we came from. So our tickets were general admission, and it's different at every track, so you kind of have to do research based on if you want a really cheap ticket, general admission is a great option. However, the views can be a little bit shaky, it's kind of unreliable. The designated general admission areas had okay views, but only from the very, very front, and people camped out. So I would not recommend trying to show up, at a reasonable hour for the race and then try to stay in the general admission areas, because you won't be able to see anything. So we had to get a little creative with where we were standing so we could actually see some of the race. At the Canadian Grand Prix, there are tons of places that you can watch the race that aren't actually designated general admission, many of which had even better views than the designated areas. So I would definitely recommend kind of scouting it out and looking around and being creative instead of just getting stuck in one of the general admission areas, because that was a lot less of a sure thing. So I really actually did like going around and getting a bunch of different views. Some were better than others, but it was really interesting to see the track at different angles. So there are a couple of things that I would do differently next time. I would leave earlier. We left at 8 a.m. I'd say probably leaving at 6:30 would have been good. Would have been more comfortable. We were a little worried on the way in that we weren't going to get there in time to find good spots to watch the race. I did really want to see the parade, and we did get there in time for the parade, but there were horrendous lines trying to get onto the island because it's a teeny tiny island. There were only 2 entrances to the whole island, so it is very tough to actually get in and get through the gates for how many people there are there. We kind of picked the wrong one and had a horrible wait to try to get onto the island, so you gotta plan some extra time in there. We were a little unprepared in that aspect, but it is something that I learned, so I would do that differently next time. I would also buy hearing protectors with radio, so we'd be able to tell what is going on better. I saw a bunch of people that had these ear protection, but then they have a radio antenna, which I was really jealous of, because you can tune into the radio of the race and find out what's going on without having to be watching it on your phone, and your ears are still protected, but you can hear what's actually going on, because as you're there, there aren't that many screens that you can watch, even from the seats, and it's kind of hard to hear, and especially in Canada, they would say something in French and they would kind of move on in English, so it'd be back and forth, and it was kind of hard to understand what was actually going on just while we were listening. So I would recommend having a way to listen to the actual race. I would also have liked to be streaming F1 TV to see the map, to be able to keep up with where everyone was on the circuit. This means I would have had to have cell service, which I do not have cell service in Canada. My dad did, so we could have done it on his phone, but I think in the future I'll probably just pay for some cell service so that I can follow along a little better and understand what is going on. It was a little hard to understand what was going on, but it was definitely worth being there. Even if we weren't quite sure what was happening the entire time, it was definitely worth it. So we did watch the race afterwards, so obviously we caught up on everything, but it was worth being there even if we weren't 100% sure what was happening at every moment. Another thing, this is really just my own problem. I did not wear shoes that I wanted to get muddy. I only got a very little bit of mud on them, thankfully, but I would wear mud-appropriate shoes next time. It had just absolutely poured during qualifying on Saturday, and it was kind of a mess. Not the whole island is paved. Not all the paths are paved, so it was pretty muddy in spots, and my shoes did get a little mud on them. They're okay. I would have been happier and a little less stressed out if I could have just walked through the mud and not been worrying about my shoes. So keep an eye on the forecast, keep an eye on what the weather has been like, because if it's going to be muddy, you might have to wear some mud-appropriate shoes. Again, I would also be more mindful of which entrance I took. Only 2 entrances, so it's kind of 50-50 whether you get the right one. Just really keep an eye on which one you're going into. I don't know what it's like at other tracks, but at this one, 2 entrances is kind of tough. I'm assuming other places have better ways of handling it because this is a small island with small bridges, so I'd imagine other circuits have better infrastructure for this. But yeah, it was disappointing to be watching the parade go by from the bridge and being like, oh, well, I wish I was watching that. Alright, next I'm going to move on to things that I would do the same. I think there were a lot of things that we did well. I would mostly replicate exactly what we did, but there are a couple things that I'd like to specifically point out. I would definitely still get general admission tickets. General admission is way better than a bad seat, because in a bad seat you're stuck sitting there the whole time because you paid extra for it, and it just, I don't know, I feel like it would be sad to pay for a seat and then end up using general admission anyway. I would recommend general admission if you're not looking to spend extra on a good seat. I would not camp out for any specific spot because I really liked being able to move around and look at a bunch of different views of the track. I would not buy food inside. I didn't want to wait in any of those lines, so we brought our own food, but the lines were way worse than I could have imagined. Even just walking around was like basically impossible. Waiting for the bathroom was really hard too. It was super long lines, so I'm glad that I didn't try to buy any food or anything. I did buy just this hat. It was during the race though, so the lines were pretty non-existent, but yeah, food would have been tough. And then finally, I would not stay in Montreal, at least for a last minute trip. If I were planning a far time in advance, maybe I would. Maybe it would be a little cheaper than at the last minute, but it gets really, really expensive, especially close to the actual race. And taking the metro from Montreal was absolute madness. Most everyone stays actually in the city, so there's like a couple metro routes, but they all end up on the same train going to one stop to get to the actual circuit, so it's pretty tough to actually get there when you're staying in the city based on how many hundreds of thousands of people are trying to get to that one island. So I would not stay in Montreal unless I have ample time to plan it, but for a last minute budget trip I would definitely avoid that. So finally, it is very exciting to go to a race like Monaco, but your home Grand Prix will end up being cheaper. So here is an itinerary that I would recommend following for general admission, and I'm just using the Canadian Grand Prix as an example. So if the race is at 2 p.m. like it was this year, from say like Boston, you would leave at 6 a.m. depending, making sure there's no traffic actually around Boston. Or you could be even as far as New York City, you could leave at 5 or 5:30 a.m. You could do this from most anywhere in the Northeast, a bunch of Quebec, some of Ontario. Really just take the hike, drive as many hours as you are comfortable with in a day. We had the luxury of staying with family around halfway to Montreal, so that was really great. But honestly, you could do it in a day if you are a trooper with driving. My family does a lot of driving trips, so it wasn't so bad for us, but really the cheapest way to go to a Grand Prix is to drive both ways and not stay overnight. It will make for a really long day, but you'll be spending tons less money if you don't stay over. So if you're driving from basically anywhere in the Northeast, I would go to the east side of the river and try to avoid Montreal at all costs, because I'm sure the roads were horrible. I'm sure they are always horrible on race day because everyone is staying in the city and they're all trying to get to one place. So there was absolutely no traffic on the east side of the river, which was wonderful. So I would definitely do that again. So then you park and take the metro. And then before the race, because you're there hours and hours early, thankfully, walk around and scope out spots to watch the race, hopefully before it gets crowded, because like I said, it's basically impossible to walk around once most everyone gets there. It's like complete gridlock. You can't even move, basically. It was really, really crowded. Then I would pick one spot and watch the parade and kind of stay put there until the race starts, because it just gets so impossible to move right before the race. So if you pick one spot, you can stay, you can watch the start, maybe stream that part on your phone because you probably won't be able to see much of anything at that point. And then once the race is actually going, you can bounce around to different spots, have some different views, and enjoy it. I would recommend leaving by lap 55 out of 70 to get out before the crowds, or you could stay well after the race has ended and people have cleared out, but if you're driving both ways, it might be quite a long day if you're staying hours after the race has ended. We left at lap 55 and got back to our car right as the race was finishing. We could hear the final laps go by, and we were watching like the stats on our phone go by, like, oh, Verstappen won, wow, how surprising. Yeah, you get out in time, so there were no crowds. It was great. What we did, we just hopped on the metro, no crowds at all, and then we got back to the car and drove home. So that was how I went to the Canadian Grand Prix for less than $200, and I cannot wait to do it again. It was a really, really fun day. It was a super cool experience, and I'm already planning the next Grand Prix I'm going to. Like, it is so cool. So I hope you guys are able to go to your home races, and let me know if this information is helpful for you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys later. Bye!